Right now, somewhere near you, a plant is growing through a crack in the sidewalk. Nobody planted it. Nobody waters it. It just grows. For most of human history, that plant was considered a weed. Today, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry and one of the most argued about substances on Earth. But here's the real twist. Your ancestors weren't looking to get high. They were looking for rope. Cannabis first enters the human story as a fiber crop, farmed across Central Asia and China thousands of years ago for its incredibly strong stalks, nets, cords, fabric. That's it. That's the entire relationship at first. People didn't discover weed. People discovered rope. Somewhere along the way, someone burned the flowering tops instead of the stalks, maybe by accident, maybe out of curiosity, and the smoke drifting through that fire did something no other campfire smoke did. But if people only wanted rope for thousands of years, why did they suddenly start burning the flowers? The answer sits in the plant itself, and almost nobody explains it properly. Cannabis produces over 100 compounds called cannabinoids. The two you've probably heard of are THC and CBD. THC is the one that alters your mind. CBD mostly doesn't. Both come from a sticky, resin-like substance the plant produces almost entirely in its flowers, not its stalks. That resin also contains terpenes, aromatic oils responsible for the plant's smell, which subtly shape how the high actually feels. This is why your ancestors could farm cannabis stalks for 1,000 years and feel nothing. The stalk barely makes any of these compounds. The flower is where all the chemistry lives. Burn the stalk, and you're just burning fiber. Burn the flower, and you're releasing a completely different substance. Here's a detail almost nobody mentions. It's the female flower that matters. Male cannabis plants exist mostly to produce pollen. Female plants, left unpollinated, pour their energy into large, resin-covered buds instead of seeds, buds that are dramatically richer in cannabinoids. Ancient farmers, without knowing anything about plant reproduction, likely noticed that certain plants produced a far stronger effect than others. They were noticing the females, and once they started favoring those plants, they were completely by accident running a breeding program. Picture that farmer for a second, walking through a field, pulling seeds from the plants that made people feel the most, and quietly ignoring the rest. No notebook, no science, just generation after generation of that same simple choice, repeated for centuries, until an ordinary fiber crop had been reshaped into something entirely different, purely through attention and preference. But if the smoke changes how you feel, what is it actually doing to you? This is where the story goes inside your body, and it goes much deeper than most people ever learn. Your brain and body already run something called the endocannabinoid system. It exists in every human, regardless of whether they've ever touched cannabis in their life. Its normal job is regulation, mood, appetite, pain, memory, sleep, stress response. It's a quiet, constant background process, keeping those systems balanced. The main signaling molecule in that system is called anandamide, named after the Sanskrit word for bliss. Your body produces it in small, short bursts exactly when needed and breaks it down again within minutes. It's involved in the calm you feel after exercise, the way stress can suddenly ease, the way a good meal feels satisfying rather than just filling. Anandamide works by docking onto receptors scattered through your body. The two major types are called CB1 and CB2. CB1 receptors sit mostly in the brain, concentrated in specific regions. The hippocampus, which handles memory, the cerebellum, which handles coordination, the basal ganglia, involved in movement and reward, the prefrontal cortex, involved in judgment and time perception. Each region does something different, which is exactly why cannabis produces such a wide, sometimes contradictory range of effects. CB2 receptors, meanwhile, live mostly outside the brain, concentrated in your immune system, where they help regulate inflammation and pain. Scientists studying CB2 are especially interested in it for exactly that reason, since a receptor system that can dial inflammation up or down has enormous implications for conditions ranging from arthritis to autoimmune disease, and that research is still actively unfolding today. THC doesn't build new receptors when it enters your body. It hijacks the ones already there. Its molecular shape is close enough to anandamides that it slots into the same CB1 and CB2 receptors your body was already using. Think of it like a spare key cut slightly wrong. It still turns the lock. It just doesn't turn it the way the original key would, and it doesn't get removed from the lock. nearly as quickly. So what actually happens once THC turns that lock? Once THC binds to a CB1 receptor, it changes how nearby neurons release their signaling chemicals. In some circuits, it reduces the release of GABA, a neurotransmitter that normally puts the brakes on neural activity. With fewer brakes, dopamine increases in your brain's reward pathway, which is part of why cannabis can feel pleasurable. But researcher Nora Volkow, director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, has pointed out that this dopamine release is far smaller than what drugs like cocaine produce, which is one reason cannabis carries a different addiction risk profile than many other substances. Meanwhile, in the hippocampus, THC disrupts the normal process of encoding short-term memory into longer-term storage. That's why a conversation from 10 minutes ago can suddenly feel slippery. It's not that the memory disappeared, it's that it was never filed away properly in the first place. In the hypothalamus, THC interacts with a hunger hormone called ghrelin, which is part of why food can suddenly taste extraordinary. In the prefrontal cortex, altered activity disrupts your normal sense of time, which is part of why 5 minutes can feel like 20. And because CB1 receptors are so widespread and so individually variable from person to person, the exact same dose can leave one person completely relaxed and another person anxious. Same molecule, same receptors, different nervous system underneath. Why would identical chemistry produce opposite emotions in two different people? Part of the answer lies in dose and setting, but part of it lies in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, which also carries CB1 receptors. In low activity, cannabis can quiet that region enough to feel calming. In someone whose amygdala is already primed toward vigilance, or at a high enough dose, the same compound can tip it the other way entirely, producing a racing heart and a flood of unwanted thoughts. Researchers studying this variation, including work summarized by psychiatrist and cannabis researcher Deepak Cyril D'Souza at Yale, have pointed out that genetics, prior experience, and even the specific balance of THC to CBD in a given batch of cannabis can all shift which direction a person tips. That's not just THC binds a receptor. That's a chain reaction, receptor by receptor, second by second. If your ancestors' bodies were already built with locks for this plant, why does that lock even exist? That question flips the entire story around because it's not really about your brain anymore. It's about the plant. Cannabis didn't evolve THC to get humans high. Scientists studying plant chemistry believe THC likely evolved as a defense mechanism, protecting the plant from ultraviolet radiation, deterring insects, and helping the plant cope with environmental stress. The psychoactive effect on the human brain may be essentially an evolutionary accident. A molecule built for a plant's own survival happened to fit almost perfectly into a signaling system mammals had already been using for tens of millions of years. With that chemistry established, the ritual moved fast once it took hold. In ancient India, cannabis appears woven into religious life as bhang, a drink prepared for festivals honoring the god Shiva, described in texts over 3,000 years old. In ancient China, the physician Hua Tuo is said to have used cannabis-based compounds as an early surgical anesthetic. The Greek historian Herodotus described the Scythians, nomads north of the Black Sea, throwing cannabis seeds onto heated stones inside small tents and inhaling the vapor as part of funeral rites, the smoke curling up through the tent as mourners sat in a circle around the stones. Grief, medicine, divinity, different continents, no contact with each other, and yet the same instinct kept appearing. If cannabis became sacred almost everywhere it landed, why did modern society eventually turn it into a crime? That question belongs to policy and history, not chemistry, and it's a story for another day. What matters here is what changed underneath the ritual, because the plant your ancestors burned in those ancient braziers was nowhere close to what exists today. Centuries of selective breeding, and more recently, precise agricultural science, including indoor growing under controlled light cycles and deliberately engineered genetics, have pushed THC concentrations dramatically higher than anything available in the ancient world. Where ancient cannabis likely contained a small fraction of the THC found in modern strains, contemporary cultivation techniques can concentrate that same compound many times over, turning an occasional, mild ritual substance into something with a dramatically different intensity profile. Which raises one final question. Are you and your ancestors even still using the same plant?